Billionaires, they are richer today than they've been in decades. But according to economists like Gabriel Zucman, they do not pay their fair share in taxes. While average Americans pay an effective tax rate of about 30%, Forbes' 400 richest individuals pay only 28%. And paradoxically, in Europe, things are even more extreme. Whereas middle-class Europeans pay around 50% in taxes, billionaires pay only about 20 to 30%. However, every time someone talks about taxing the ultra-rich, you always hear the same response. They will simply pack up their bags and leave to Monaco, Switzerland, Dubai or any other country that offers a better tax deal. The UK tried taxing the rich in the 1970s and it lost to Rolling Stones and David Bowie. France tried in 2012 and lost Gérard Depardieu. Norway tried it in 2022 and faced a significant exodus of billionaires. On the other hand, the Lego and Maersk families famously stayed in Denmark after it abolished its wealth tax in 1997, and when Sweden did the same in 2007, it famously saw the return of icons like IKEA founder Ingvar Kamprad and Björn Borg. The political right argues that taxing the rich is simply a bad deal because if they leave to flee high taxes, they will take their companies and jobs with them. And if enough leave, this could even mean that by raising taxes on the wealthy, the government ends up collecting fewer taxes overall. Now the left will counter that this is nonsense. Sure, a few may leave, but wealth taxes will still help fund social policies, and billionaires don't produce that much value anyway. So if some leave, they leave behind a more equal, harmonious society. Now the problem is that nobody knows at which point higher taxes on the rich become self-defeating. So the debate ends up dominated by sensationalist headlines and anecdotes. Luckily for us, a new study in the prestigious journal American Economic Review dug into an extraordinary amount of Swedish and Danish administrative records to see how the wealthy actually respond when the wealth tax changes. And this means that for the first time we now have evidence-based calculations on how many billionaires will leave, what happens to their businesses and the economy as a whole if you truly tax billionaires where it hurts. So before we settle the debate between left and right once and for all, we need to start with the tax that the ultra-rich hate the most. You see, most millionaires and billionaires do not earn their income by working for a wage. Instead, they make most of their income by far from their capital, their properties, their stocks and their private companies. But while it's pretty straightforward to tax wages and dividends, it's actually quite difficult to tax so-called capital gains as the price is going up for two reasons. The first reason is practical. The asset class that billionaires benefit most from are private companies. Take billionaire-owned IKEA from Sweden or Lego from Denmark. What are these companies worth? Since they are not regularly traded, nobody is really sure. Now the second reason that wealth taxes are difficult is political. You see, while companies that are traded, like Elon Musk's SpaceX, are easy to value, they can swing pretty wildly. For example, just a few days ago, Elon Musk was the world's first trillionaire. But as of recording this video, SpaceX already lost so much value that Musk's personal wealth dropped by 13% in just 2 weeks. And that means that the government, if they tried to tax his capital gains at 30% just 2 weeks ago, his tax bill now could have been 50% instead. Of course, you could argue that in the case of Musk, he will be fine, but given that most governments want a predictable tax system, they have chosen to only charge a capital gains tax when such gains are realized. That is, when billionaires themselves choose to sell their assets. But what if you never sell your assets, your stocks and your company, and you never distribute dividends? Well, in that case, you can sit and watch how your assets appreciate while never worrying about paying any taxes at all. And that's why Warren Buffett famously said that he paid less taxes than his secretary. He could just hold onto his stocks, watch them grow and borrow against them to finance a comfortable lifestyle without ever paying a dime in taxes. Now, to avoid these kind of tricky issues, many economists argue that it would be simpler if workers pay an income tax while the super wealthy simply pay a small percentage on their total wealth, a wealth tax.
If you're extremely wealthy, You have to pay a minimum each and every year, no exception, and that minimum has to be expressed as a fraction of your wealth.
If properly implemented, billionaires absolutely hate wealth taxes because these cannot simply be dodged by never paying out dividends or not selling shares. Therefore, wealth taxes typically cause a lot of billionaires to complain about them first, and if that doesn't work, they threaten to leave. And because most billionaire wealth is tied up in financial markets and private businesses that can be fairly easily moved out of the country, and we live in a world of free trade and capital, and therefore the easiest way to escape a wealth tax is by simply moving to another country and taking your firm with you. But do billionaires actually do this? This is where Jacobsen and her co-authors' new research paper comes in. Both Sweden and Denmark used to have an annual wealth tax of around 2% on net wealth. Denmark abolished it in 1996 and Sweden in 2007. Both countries had pretty sophisticated systems to measure wealth and can track how many wealthy residents were emigrating each year. And this allowed researchers to calculate exactly how much you can tax billionaires before they leave. So, the answer from Sweden and Denmark, it seems to be, even if you raise the wealth tax a little bit, some billionaires will leave. So, how much can you tax them before they leave? Some will always leave. It's more about how many will leave. Concretely, after Sweden abolished its 2% wealth tax, it saw a reduction in 34% of wealthy people leaving. Now that may sound like a lot, but consider this. Only 0.34% of ultra-rich Swedish were emigrating every year before the tax was abolished. So even with a wealth tax, over 99% of wealthy Swedes preferred staying in Sweden. So because only a tiny number of billionaires emigrate each year, this means that a 1% increase in the top wealth tax rate decreases the stock of wealthy taxpayers by about 2%. But this relatively small fact could be because the Swedish wealth tax had a unique feature, we have to be honest. It fully exempted, so it didn't count assets held in private corporations. And that means if you were a 1990s startup founder in Stockholm and you never had to sell your shares, you could breathe easily because the value locked inside your company largely escaped this wealth tax. On the other hand, in Denmark, which the authors also looked at, private companies were not exempt. So you'd expect a much bigger effect of abolishing the wealth tax there, but that was not the case. The authors found roughly the same effect. A 1% increase in the top wealth tax decreased the stock of billionaire taxpayers by about 2%. So the result was actually pretty robust across borders. And therefore, if we apply the main result of this paper to, for example, the UK Green Party's politicians Zach Polanski's 2% wealth tax proposal for all wealth over £1 billion, then the evidence from Sweden and Denmark implies that the UK will lose 4% of these wealthy taxpayers. Now, importantly, what does that mean for wealth tax revenue? Well, doing a quick back-of-the-napkin calculation, there were 156 billionaires in the UK in 2025. Together they controlled around 654 billion pounds, and given that 156 billion in wealth would be exempt from the 2%, there would roughly be 498 billion left to tax. Now we could calculate that just 4% of UK billionaires will leave, and therefore there will be a slightly lower wealth tax revenue. But that would be too simple, because billionaires don't just pay wealth taxes, they also pay other taxes, primarily income taxes. Luckily, the researchers also took this into account for Sweden and Denmark and estimated that for every dollar, krona or pound won in wealth taxes, about only 22 cents are lost on other taxes from billionaires leaving. And based on these numbers, the UK wealth tax should bring in about 498 billion times 2% times 78% is 7.8 billion pounds every year. That's a significant amount of money. The government of the UK could use this to really fully fund their plan, that's already there, to buy 8 new battery factories, 6 clean steel plants, 9 renewable-ready ports, and a hydrogen electric plant, and several net zero clusters. That's great news. But on the total government budget of £1,368 billion, it's pocket change. It's roughly 0.5%. So while the right is correct that wealth taxes cause billionaires to leave, the best evidence that we have shows us that the left is correct that not enough billionaires leave to offset the wealth tax. But that intellectual victory is really slim if you consider that we are talking about just 0.5% of the government budget. To make matters worse, we have only considered the effect of billionaires leaving on taxes. But as you can see here from this graph of Sweden, most people do actually work for the rich and for the ultra-rich, either directly as an employee or indirectly as a contractor. So this gets us to our next major question about taxing the billionaire class. Will rich people leaving hurt the economy? Again, the Sweden paper offers a very interesting insight. The researchers could actually follow what happened to the businesses that these wealthy emigrants left behind. And the picture is not pretty at first glance. When a business owner subject to the wealth tax left the country, their company took a real hit. Jobs fell by 1/3, investment dropped by 1/5, and the value of the firm produced shrank by 1/3. The taxes it paid were roughly cut in half. To put it in plain terms, an owner leaves and the company they built will start to decay. But on the bright side, because so few wealthy people were actually leaving because of the wealth tax in the first place, abolishing the wealth tax barely affected the economy as a whole. We're talking a few hundredths of a percent on jobs and investments and about 0.2% on the size of the economy. At the level of the whole country, the effect of the tax exodus was almost invisible. So, taxing the ultra-rich does not bring in much money, but it also does not crash the economy. So, we should just do it anyway, right? For the sake of fairness. Well, hold on. There's one feature of wealth taxes that we don't actually talk about that much in public debate, but surprisingly it came out of this research paper as the real problem with wealth taxes, which is that private firms that are not listed and are therefore hard to value because they're not traded, they are the real problem. For example, even a country like Norway that tracks almost perfectly even how much your car collection is worth, they were not able to properly value private firms. Therefore, they ended up valuing them based purely on hard assets like buildings and bank accounts in the firm. But because the real value in most firms comes from intangible stuff you cannot touch, like a brand or technical know-how and customer loyalty, these firms ended up being structurally undervalued by governments. And this then created a massive incentive for the billionaire class that stayed behind, which are most of them, to try and dodge wealth taxes by moving their wealth from things that can be valued, like stock markets and property, into private companies that are difficult to value. And as we've seen, private firms are a substantial share of billionaire wealth, much larger than property, for example. Another good example is Spain. When it reintroduced its wealth tax in 2011, they exempted business assets along with primary residences, where people actually live, from the tax base. That sounds reasonable. You want to protect small business owners and homeowners. But what actually happened, there was a massive reallocation of wealth towards private firms and massive villas. Someone holding stocks would sell them and buy a house. Someone with diversified investments would shift into business shares of private companies. And as a result, the wealth tax base collapsed by between 42% to 51% after the introduction of the Spanish wealth tax. And this is exactly what the Sweden-Denmark paper also found. Remember that 22 cents lost to people fleeing the country for every dollar taxed? Well, the wealthy who stay put cost the treasury more than twice that, roughly 54 cents on the dollar. By quietly rearranging their portfolios, saving less and dodging the tax, they rendered a lot of the wealth tax useless. Now when you combine the 22 cents lost to billionaires fleeing with the 54 cents lost to billionaires dodging inside the borders of your country, your shiny new wealth tax loses 76% of its power. Only 24 cents on every krona, pound or dollar could theoretically be collected. So, adjusting our back-of-the-napkin calculation for the UK, that 2% billionaire tax would not bring in 7.8 billion. it would bring in closer to 2.4 billion, a microscopic 0.70% of total UK government spending. And yes, while this calculation is very rough, estimations are based just on the evidence from Sweden and Denmark, it is actually consistent with what we know from countries that still run wealth taxes. In Norway, where the wealth tax targeted the upper classes in general, not just billionaires, so it brought in a little bit more, the wealth tax still brings in less than 2% of total government revenue. In Spain, that's even less. Not nothing, but nowhere near enough to bankroll the ambitious programs that politicians usually talk about when discussing wealth taxes. So in conclusion, the evidence from the Scandinavian experience is clear. You can tax the rich more, and while it will cause some billionaires to leave, absolutely, it will not cause a true billionaire exodus. But sadly, wealth taxes are no miracle solution. Even if billionaires did not react to them, they would just bring in a fraction of government revenue, simply because billionaires do not own that much compared to how much the government spends each year. Yet if we take into account that some billionaires do leave, and the ones that stay behind abuse the fact that you cannot easily value private companies, you should expect that only 24 cents will be left for every dollar, pound or euro that wealth taxes should theoretically raise. So should we just give up on taxing billionaires altogether? No, that's not the point of this video at all. While it is contested, the evidence that billionaires pay a lower tax rate in most countries than even the middle class is pretty strong. So the tax system is what they call regressive, at least at the very top. Most on the political left want to see a progressive tax system instead. And on the right, there are some voices that would want a flat tax, the same rate for everyone that is. But even on the right, there are not many people that argue that billionaires should pay a lower tax rate than the middle class. So for a smart politician, there is actually a lot of political capital available to make the tax system more fair. People genuinely probably want that. And sure, we have seen today some pretty compelling evidence that wealth taxes alone are unlikely to be a miracle solution. But that doesn't mean that the tax system is impossible to fix. It just means that if you want the rich to pay their fair share, you will need to find the right mix of income taxes, capital gains taxes, wealth taxes, exit taxes, and inheritance taxes to make tax dodging as hard as it can possibly be. You may also need to come together with other countries, or sometimes even within states, to coordinate taxes in such a way that they work in a world where there is free trade and free movement of capital. Not an easy task, but it is possible for people who are willing to think a bit beyond simplistic wealth tax proposals. And for those people, I highly recommend you check out the excellent analysis by our advertising sponsor, The Economist, which I always check out for the research process of my videos. One thing that I really like about The Economist is that they listen to different perspectives on controversial issues like wealth taxes. For this episode, I was particularly fascinated by their interview with Gabriel Zucman, where he made his case for taxing billionaires more. Then follow that up with the contrarian take that no, actually wealth taxes are a bad idea. And finally, check out their in-depth video on how much the rich should pay in taxes. As these examples show, The Economist delivers insights that help you see the bigger picture and think for yourself. This is why I almost always rely on their analysis for my research, and it's why I highly recommend you subscribe. And that is actually now even more interesting than ever, given that they are offering a special 35% discount for money and macro viewers. Whether you prefer their daily journalism in the Economist app, or you are like me and enjoy catching up on the global economy over the weekend with a nice cup of coffee and the print edition, you'll always stay on top of the latest global developments and support journalism that values factual information, integrity, and an independent point of view. So, do not miss out. Click the link in the description below or top comment, or head over to economist.com/moneymacro to claim your exclusive 35% discount today.